With the upcoming Alone in the Dark bringing the instrumental survival horror series back from the dead, I, Suggestive Gaming, figured now would be a great time to look at the story of the entire long-running franchise so far. As always, I've got a few notes before we dive in. Firstly, there are a few pieces of media I won't be covering, including a French comic book adaptation of the third game, and no, I won't be covering the Uwe Boll directed film adaptation or its sequel. While everything else is fair game, there is a bit of a continuity split in the series, as 2001's Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare rebooted the series into a new universe, which was quickly tossed aside in 2008 when the series returned to its original continuity. As such, the story of The New Nightmare will get its own segment in this video, as will the prologue to the new installment coming this year, Grace in the Dark, which once again will reboot the storyline. Before we begin, I do want to give a shout out to Terror Bites, an upcoming documentary about the evolution of horror gaming. If you've seen one of my videos, chances are it's one covering a beloved horror game franchise. Terror Bites is a celebration of all of them and more, diving deep into the games that have shaped the horror genre, as well as the developers and artists who brought these nightmares to reality. One such mastermind is Hubert Chardot, writer of the first two Alone in the Dark games and scenario designer of the third, who was interviewed for this documentary. What perfect timing! I very rarely promote projects on What You Need to Know, but as a longtime fan of the folks behind Terabytes, this is one I truly think you'll enjoy giving a look. There's a link to check out Terabytes in the description, and it's not even a sponsored link. I didn't get paid a cent for this, I just wanted to share it. Thank you for your time. Now, without further ado, this is what you need to know about the Alone in the Dark franchise so far. Our story begins in September 1924, when famed painter Jeremy Hartwood is found dead by hanging in the loft of his home, the supposedly haunted Derceto Manor in Louisiana. In the wake of his death, two individuals are beckoned to the departed's now abandoned mansion. First, Edward Carnby, a private detective, is tasked by an antique dealer named Gloria Allen to find and retrieve a piano from the manor's loft. Jeremy's niece, Emily Hartwood, is informed by her family's attorney, Mr. McCarthy, of her uncle's death. Curious to learn more about what Jeremy had been hiding, Emily travels to the mansion to investigate. Upon arrival at Derceto Manor, whoever the visitor is approaches the mansion, unaware that something sinister watches from the loft window. As they enter, the doors to the mansion slam and lock behind them. In the loft, they encounter a monster, but after evading it, they learn that it is only the first of many harmful creatures now inhabiting the manor. While trying to find a way to escape Derceto, our hero discovers the dark history of the manor. As it turns out, it was built by pirate Ezekiel Prext. Beneath the home lay a system of caverns, where the pirate conducted occult rituals in order to extend his life. In 1862, Prext was shot and nearly killed before his servants infused his soul into a tree within the caverns under the manor. When the home was later purchased by Howard Hartwood, the spirit of Prext attempted to influence the man to draw him beneath Derceto so he could inhabit the mortal's body. Howard took his own life to prevent the pirate from taking his body, the same fate his son would soon face, setting the current events in motion. Our hero is able to find the tree and set fire to it, finally destroying the remaining spirit of Ezekiel Prext and cleansing Derceto Manor of his monstrous servants. Edward or Emily are then able to exit the mansion's now unlocked front doors, where a driver quickly meets them in the driveway. When they enter his car, however, the driver is revealed to be another monster, but the car nonetheless takes off back towards civilization. On Halloween of that year, we find an 8-year-old girl named Grace Saunders, who gets lost in the big city while trick-or-treating. She soon finds an abandoned toy store and enters it, where she is soon trapped as the toys come alive and attack her. Grace finds that Father Christmas is being trapped as well, and soon learns that the toys are led by Jack in the Dark, an evil Jack in the Box. After finding a stick of candy, she gives it to Jack, distracting the toy long enough for Grace to hold a mirror before him. The sight of his own fearful form scares Jack in the dark to death, stopping the toy onslaught. Father Christmas is freed and gives Grace a dress as thanks, before flying off on his sleigh to prepare for the upcoming holiday. Months later, near Christmas, Grace is kidnapped by a mysterious woman and taken to a mansion in California known as Hell's Kitchen. Grace's father, George Saunders, goes to private investigator Ted Stryker, who tracks the girl to the mansion he deems to be haunted by the ghost of One-Eyed Jack. After informing his colleague, Edward Carnby, now famed as a supernatural private eye after the events at Derceto Manor, of its location via telegraph, Ted arrives and is able to sneak past various guards to find Grace. As soon as he does, however, Ted is killed by a seemingly possessed toy clown, and the mysterious woman arrives in the wake of the murder. 2 days later, Carnby travels to Hell's Kitchen after receiving no further word from Stryker. There, Carnby blasts his way past the mansion's gates, fighting through the guards using their own weapons to explore the grounds. While Carnby isn't able to directly enter the mansion, he's able to work his way through a hedge maze to find an underground passage, where he soon locates his dead friend's body. Vowing to avenge Ted's death and rescue Grace Saunders, Carnby sneaks his way into the mansion's cellar, where he is able to ascend into Hell's Kitchen. Whilst exploring the mansion, Carnby learns that Hell's Kitchen is home to voodoo sorceress Elizabeth Jarrett, the mysterious woman who kidnapped Grace. Jarrett, a former lover of Ezekiel Preggst, had used her powers to grant immortality to a pirate named One-Eyed Jack, along with his crew, who built the mansion and still inhabit it. Carnby finds Grace, but is met face to face with One-Eyed Jack. Shortly after, Carnby is incapacitated by Jarrett, who uses her powers to capture him. In the shuffle, Grace is able to escape from her captor's watch, but is unable to reach freedom, as she is also captured and brought to the same holding cell as Carnby, which happens to be inside of the bowels of Jack's ship, the Flying Dutchman. There, Jarrett reveals that Grace is to be used in some sort of ritual that's conducted every 100 years to keep One-Eyed Jack and his crew alive. After Jarrett disappears, Grace is again able to get free and sneak around the Dutchman, which is somehow linked to Hell's Kitchen. After Grace helps Carnby escape from his shackles, the private eye fights his way to the captain's quarters, but he is once again stopped by Elizabeth Jarrett's psychic powers. Luckily, Grace arrives just in time to disrupt Jarrett's ritual, destroying the voodoo sorceress while transporting the girl safely to an escape boat. Carnby escapes to the deck of the Flying Dutchman, but he's confronted by several of the ship's crew, who he is forced to defeat. Suddenly, Carnby spots that Grace has been captured and chained to the ship's mast by One-Eyed Jack. After freeing the girl and defeating the pirate once and for all, Carnby reaches the escape boat with Grace, leaving One-Eyed Jack alone with his vessel. Carnby then rows the boat out to sea as explosions lay in their wake, leveling the area beneath Hell's Kitchen and bringing an end to One-Eyed Jack, at least as far as we know. The next year, Edward Carnby gets a call from a man named Greg Saunders at the Hill Century Film Studio, asking him to look into the disappearance of one of their film crews in the Mojave. While Edward initially doesn't show interest, Greg tells Carnby that Emily Hartwood, his old friend from the Derceto incident, is part of the crew that's gone missing. Carnby travels to Slaughter Gulch, the ghost town in the Mojave where the team was last seen, and quickly finds the term to be literal, as several deadly spirits inhabit the area. While searching for Emily, Carnby learns about the history of Slaughter Gulch, including its deceased founder, Jed Stone, who happened to be the son of Elizabeth Jarrett and Ezekiel Preggst, as well as several outlaws such as the Elwood brothers, the Cobra Lee Tung, and the lone miner Jim Burris. After traveling through the town and finding a haunting message from One-Eyed Jack stating, "I'll be back," Carnby meets Tobias McCarthy, owner of the general store and leader of the mob that overthrew Jed Stone and his men. Tobias sacrifices himself to help Carnby, who is able to retrieve a stash of Hill Century's money to give to the ghost of Jed in exchange for Emily's freedom. After holding up his end of the deal, however, Carnby is double-crossed and murdered by Jed's men. Suddenly, Carnby's spirit is awoken by an ancient amulet he had previously found. Reincarnated into the form of a cougar, Carnby returns an eagle statue to its rightful place. Completing this task allows Carnby's spirit to return to his body just as he's being buried by the town's former sheriff, Jack Dawson. Carnby emerges from his grave and fights his own undead doppelganger, somehow created in the resurrection process. Soon, Carnby finds himself in a series of caves leading to an underground facility. There, he defeats Jed's henchmen before finally finding Emily. Carnby frees her from captivity before taking on an armored Jed Stone alongside the Elwood brothers. While Carnby is outnumbered, he's able to outsmart the trio and defeat all three, bringing an end to Jed Stone's reign in Slaughter Gulch. In the wake of this battle, Carnby escapes with Emily's help, as the pair enter an abandoned train and get it moving. The train then blasts out of the caverns, taking the pair away from Slaughter Gulch, but to an unknown future. Years go by, and in 1938, Edward Carnby is seen for the last time in Delhi before he mysteriously goes missing. 70 years later, in 2008, Edward Carnby awakens with no memories, finding himself held captive alongside an old man by two other men, who had seemingly performed some kind of ritual on Carnby to weaken him. One man instructs the other to take Carnby to the roof to kill him, but after the pair ascend up the stairs, a dark force emerges and kills the guard, allowing Edward to escape. On his way out, Carnby passes a mirror, noting that he doesn't recognize the man in the reflection. Carnby soon finds himself atop an elevator carrying the old man and his captor. His captor speaks to the old man, who he refers to as Theo Paddington, and claims that he will torture him until he uses some kind of stone amulet to show them the path of light. Suddenly, massive cracks start to run down the building, and dark forces begin to emerge from the fissures, killing another one of the captor's guards before taking the elevator crashing down, separating Edward from Paddington. Edward then continues his escape from the building, working with several other survivors he finds along the way to avoid the cracks, quickly realizing that the building he is currently escaping resides in New York City, just outside of Central Park. One of the survivors, Anna, suddenly snaps and kills another, turning to Edward to reveal a grotesque, scarred face. An entity states that Anna is now one of their hosts, before revealing that Edward has also been one in the past. The being demands that Edward give them the stone, leading to a fight between the two. After Edward incapacitates Anna, he reaches another elevator where he meets a survivor named Sarah Flores. Sarah screams for help, alerting some humans corrupted by the dark force, who rush the elevator and send it crashing to the ground floor. Just as Edward's captor escapes, the pair escape the elevator and search for a way out of the collapsed building. After finding a gun and shooting his way through several hostile creatures infected by the being that continuously calls out to Edward to join him, Edward finds Theo Paddington in the building's garage. Paddington reveals that he and Edward had been working together and that their captor, Crowley, will soon arrive to retrieve the stone. Following Paddington's advice to follow the path of light, Edward finds a working vehicle to drive out into the city, finding it in a war-torn state with fissures erupting all around. Paddington states that this is what he released from the stone. The group then make a daring escape from the fissures that continue to ravage the city. After they crash, luckily outside of harm's way, the three argue over what to do next. Surprisingly, Paddington pulls a gun on Edward and Sarah, demanding that the former go to the museum to follow the path of light, which Carnby has evidently been preparing to do for his entire life. As the fissures begin to reach them, Paddington gives Edward the stone before shouting out to the unknown entity that he won't be their puppet. Paddington then gives Edward the cryptic instruction to meet him at the museum in room 943 before putting the gun to his own head. Despite Edward's attempts, he is unable to stop the old man from pulling the trigger. In the wake of his death, Paddington's phone begins to ring, and Edward answers it to find Crowley on the other end, taunting him about the stone, which he claims will only draw the fissures closer and closer to Carnby. After patching up his wounds, Edward travels underground, where he gets another call from Crowley, offering him a deal. If Edward brings him the stone, Crowley will help him regain his memories, proving this by finally telling Carnby his own full name. After escaping the dark force still trying to block his path, Carnby meets with Sarah and a doctor who looks up Edward's history. The group are then shocked to learn that Carnby had gone missing 70 years prior, despite his appearance. Edward then takes Sarah with him, and the pair head off towards the museum. On their way, they're attacked and carried away by flying creatures escaping from the fissures. After fighting them off, Edward gets another cryptic message from Crowley, which Sarah deciphers to figure out that the dark force breaking through the city is none other than Lucifer himself, trying to make his return. As the pair reach the museum, more flying creatures suddenly arrive and grab Sarah, carrying her away from Carnby before she's dropped inside the museum. Carnby enters the museum and searches for Sarah, soon finding her trapped within a cocoon of Lucifer's dark tendrils. Edward rescues her from the cocoon, and with a deeper understanding of what he's going through, Sarah pulls Carnby in for a kiss. Edward then leaves Sarah behind to rest as he searches for room 943. He comes across a security guard who worked for Paddington, who agrees to let Carnby into the room if he can reach the door. Edward is then confronted by a giant creature sent by Lucifer. After he defeats it, Sarah rejoins him, and the pair finally reach room 943, which appears to be Paddington's office. There, Sarah finds a photograph of Carnby and his pupil, a young Theo Paddington, in 1936. The lights then go out, and the ghost of Paddington appears to point out several words to Edward, eventually forming the sentence, "I want you to knock him down, Sarah." Taking this command literally, Sarah then grabs a pipe and knocks Carnby out, at his request. While unconscious, Carnby enters a plane of existence where he's able to speak with Paddington's spirit directly. Paddington tells him that the stone he's carrying is the Philosopher's Stone, which had contained the essence of Lucifer's soul, laying in wait until the right time to return and take his revenge. Paddington foiled this plan by releasing Lucifer from the stone, but the fallen angel will stop at nothing to retrieve it. Paddington then leaves Carnby with a clue to wake up and close his eyes, pointing him to a secret in Central Park. Carnby then comes to and follows Paddington's directions by closing his eyes, finding a secret passage leading to a large stone structure. There, Edward and Sarah find Paddington's diary, as well as a lens for a flashlight. Sarah reads a prophecy inscribed on the wall, stating that the hands of Venus will shape the lock to this door, while Mars will fight to bring the key back to the core. Sarah and Carnby determine that they must be Venus and Mars, respectively. So Sarah stays behind to read Paddington's diary to hopefully figure out how to build the lock, while Edward uses the lens to uncover a new path out to search for the key. After escaping into Central Park, however, Carnby is met by a helicopter with Crowley inside, and is forced to climb inside of it to escape Lucifer's dark forces. Crowley holds Edward at gunpoint, demanding he hand over the stone. Edward instead holds the stone out of the chopper, threatening to drop it unless Crowley tells him why he wants it. Crowley refuses, and their conversation is cut off by a massive, dragon-like creature that takes the helicopter down. Edward narrowly survives the crash and makes his way back to Central Park, where he's led to the end of the Path of Light. On his way to it, Edward gets a call from Sarah, who's learned that the key must be another stone medallion. When Carnby reaches his underground destination, he soon meets the other stone's carrier, a centuries-old alchemist named Hermes. Hermes had been underground, waiting for the second half of the stone to find its true carrier, who will be given a choice that will change the world. Edward takes Hermes to the surface, where he gets a call from Sarah, who reveals that she was able to build the lock, but when she completed it, a countdown started. Edward then races against the clock to get Hermes and himself back to room 943. When they arrive, however, they're shocked to find Crowley holding Sarah hostage. Without hesitation, Edward finally pulls his pistol and fires a well-aimed shot, killing Crowley and freeing Sarah. The group then return to the stone structure, where Hermes reveals a new path, revealing Lucifer's door to their world. Hermes and Carnby then insert their halves of the stone into the device, unlocking the door and forcing Edward to face Lucifer. Carnby then takes the rejoined stone, and Lucifer's soul begins to reincarnate into his body. Sarah then intervenes and jumps at Carnby, taking the stone from him. As Lucifer begins to take control of Sarah's body instead, Carnby is given his prophesized choice. He can either shoot and kill Sarah, or allow her to live. If Carnby kills Sarah, Lucifer just enters his body instead, fully reincarnating the Lightbringer, the effing universe. Lucifer then traps Hermes in the netherworld, giving an ominous message that he hasn't come alone. If Carnby instead allows Sarah to live, the pair share one final embrace. Sarah asks Edward if he loves her, and he confesses that he does, even more than regaining his memories. Suddenly, Lucifer takes over and taunts Carnby, asking him what it's like to be alone. Edward simply walks off, responding that he's used to it. While it's unknown exactly what happens to Edward Carnby, Sarah Flores, and Hermes following the events in Central Park, the forces of darkness do invade the mortal world once again 7 years later, in 2015, in a town called Lorwich in Virginia. A group of like-minded individuals joined forces to fight the darkness, including Theodore Carnby, a descendant of Edward, Sarah Hartwood, great-granddaughter of Emily Hartwood from the Derceto Manor incident, as well as engineer Gabriella Saunders and Father Henry Geiger. The events in Lorwich bring us to the end of the classic Alone in the Dark timeline. As mentioned in the intro, however, there was a standalone reboot called Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare that was given its own prequel comic. So let's go over that timeline right now. This story begins in the year 2001, where we find ethnology professor Dr. Aline Sedrak in India, searching for Agartha, the lost final resting place of Genghis Khan. Sedrak and her associate, Frank Stone, argue about whether or not it's a myth, with the woman claiming that she has a map that proves its existence. After the pair escape a group of thugs, as well as a tomb-raiding rival, they are met by a man named Ganesha, who Aline was looking for to learn about Agartha. Meanwhile, a private investigator named Edward Carnby meets with a Dr. Lang at the request of their mutual colleague, Charles Fisk. Edward states that the Servants of Darkness, the Kun Yin, are preparing their return, and that he needs information on Genghis's crown. Carnby hopes to destroy the crown before the Kun Yin can use it to release a hideous power known as the Creeping Chaos. Elsewhere, Ganesha and a group of his men take Cedric and Stone to the entrance of Agartha. There, however, the group are attacked by a group of Yeti-like creatures known as Migo. Just as the group reach the Temple of Agartha, they're surrounded by Migo, but they are quickly rescued when a flare is shot above them, which scares away the beasts. The group then turn to see their savior, Edward Carnby. They all enter the temple and discuss their motives, with Carnby stating that he wishes to destroy the crown. This causes an argument with Cedric, who states that it's priceless, but Carnby holds his ground, claiming that the influence of the crown is what caused the civilized Yan Ho race to transform into the Migo beasts they saw outside. When the group finally find the crown, Frank rushes over to it and puts it on. This kills Frank, replacing his soul with that of one of the Kun Yin. The being brings forth statued guards, but Aline is able to use her knowledge to distract them long enough for her, Carnby, and Ganesha to escape. The trio then come across the Mi-Go, whom Aline is able to communicate with. After the Mi-Go fight off the guards, they determine that they must go to the heart of the world to stop the being that's inhabiting Frank. While Ganesha runs off to save himself, Edward and Aline follow one of the Mi-Go to Agartha, the heart of the world. After fighting the local fauna, the group find Frank's stone. Unfortunately, Cedric hesitates to shoot her old friend, allowing the creeping chaos to emerge. Dr. Lang watches from afar, allowing Carnby some time to act before releasing the consuming void to stop it. Aline then rushes to Frank and incants a spell, grabbing the crown. While the spirit of the Kun Yin offers her what she's always wanted, the location of the father she never knew, she still rips the helmet off of his head. Carnby grabs her to use their combined powers to close the breach between worlds, but they soon find they're just short of enough energy. Luckily, Ganesha rejoins them and places his hand upon theirs, providing just enough power to close the breach. The trio then return to Dr. Lang's airship, where Edward and Aline once again argue over the loss of archaeological treasures. Dr. Lang then summons Edward with some bad news about Charles Fisk, leaving Ganesha alone with Aline. On Halloween of the same year, we find Edward Carnby investigating the mysterious death of his friend Charles Fisk, whose body had been found off the coast of Shadow Island, near Massachusetts. Fisk's final message to Carnby leads him to a man named Frederick Johnson, who works for a paranormal agency called Bureau 713, directly under its director, Christopher Lamb. Elsewhere, Johnson and Lamb discuss Carnby, as well as Aline Cedric, who they've convinced to investigate Shadow Island as well, leading her to believe that its owner, Professor Obed Morton, is her father. As it turns out, Bureau 713 is after 3 stone tablets from the Abkhani tribe, as well as their translations, and their plans include using Edward and Aline unknowingly to find them. Edward and Aline then join each other once again on a flight to Shadow Island to investigate their respective mysteries. As they fly over the island, however, the plane is ripped apart in air by a shadowy creature, killing the pilot and forcing Edward and Aline to grab parachutes and jump out. Aline lands on top of a mansion on the island, while Edward lands in the nearby woods. At this point, our heroes' paths separate, as they each discover the history of Shadow Island on their own. Edward fights his way through the creatures of darkness outside the manor to try to make his way inside to reunite with Aline. Meanwhile, she makes her way into the mansion through an open window, finding an old woman inside. The woman introduces herself as Obed Morton's mother, Lucy, and begs Aline to leave and take her son with her before the creatures can get him. Lucy then calls out to her husband, Howard, but a dark creature arrives instead, which Aline is able to fight off with her flashlight. Lucy then gives her an ancient native charm to protect her. As she explores the house, Aline overhears Obed speaking with his twin brother, Alan, behind a locked door about some kind of research Alan is conducting. Soon after, she spots one of the twins and chases him. Believing him to be Obed, she questions the man, who is actually Alan. Alan instead tranquilizes Aline, and she quickly loses consciousness. Meanwhile, Carnby fights his way through the courtyard and finally finds his way inside the mansion. Aline awakens alone inside of a bedroom and calls Edward via radio as soon as he reaches the main hall. Aline finds that she's locked inside the room, and Edward tells her to wait there as he searches for a way inside. Instead, Aline finds a secret passageway that leads underground. There, she finds another locked door, but one with a window that she can look through. Inside, she sees Obed speaking over the telephone with Christopher Lamb. Obed confirms with Lamb that he received some documents, before begging Lamb to send an entire army to get him off the island, as Alan apparently has something very powerful planned. Alan then catches his brother and knocks him out with a single punch, scaring Aline away. Aline returns to the room just in time to find that Edward had figured out his way into it. The pair discuss what's going on with the Mortons, and while Edward wants Aline to find a place to hide and stay safe, she argues that they have their own goals to accomplish while they're both there. Edward helps boost Aline up to a trapdoor to the attic she noticed in the room, leaving Edward behind as the pair separate once again. In the attic, Aline is shocked to find a spirit which speaks to her from inside of a mirror. The spirit tells her to retrieve another mirror of his from a witch doctor named Edenshaw, and in return, he'll restore her childhood memories, revealing her father's identity. Coincidentally, around this same time, Edward comes across Edenshaw in the mansion. Edenshaw, who introduces himself as the Guardian of the Island, tells Edward that he can learn more about his destiny at the mansion's library. Soon after, Aline finds the other mirror, but on the advice of Lucy Morton, she breaks it instead of giving it to the spirit, destroying it. Shortly after, Edenshaw arrives to compliment her on her courage. Instead of answering Aline about Obed, he instead points her to his office to learn more. Before she leaves, though, Edenshaw asks for her help in conducting the Abcanis ritual to destroy the Heart of Darkness, to prevent the creatures of Shadow from invading their world. He explains that Aline must find the 7 statues of the Gods of Light, which will allow Edenshaw to carry out the ritual. After Edenshaw mysteriously vanishes, Aline radios Edward once again to tell him to keep an eye out for the statues. Aline explores the mansion and learns of Alan's research into the darkness, as well as his experiments using his own father as a guinea pig to try to transplant its powers into humans. Aline comes across what's left of the man, now a monster stored in the library, and defeats him, at least for the time being. Following another hint from Edenshaw, Aline continues to hunt down the statues. Edward, meanwhile, spots Obed in a nearby fort on the island, and radios Aline, who goes there to finally speak to him. Obed laments that Aline is too late, as Alan has the translations to the tablets and is about to open the gate allowing the Army of Darkness to invade the world. Aline asks Obed if he knew her mother, but he states that it would be impossible for him to be her father, hinting that Bureau 713 likely fabricated the story to get her to help them find the tablets. Edward comes across a circle of stones where a ritual must be performed, and Aline reaches a planetarium which holds the key to performing it properly. The pair then work together by radio to perform this ritual and uncover more of the stone statues for Edenshaw. Afterward, they meet each other on either side of a locked gate to exchange items to help each other before they separate once again. Carnby soon reaches Alan's lab, where he watches the professor conducting an experiment. Alan spots Edward and runs off, cutting the electricity and leaving Carnby alone in the dark. Get it? With Aline's help, Edward escapes the lab, and each of them find a third statue. Believing Edenshaw to have the 7th, Edward and Aline agree to meet with him at the underground gate. After finding their way to the gate, the pair find not only Edenshaw there, but Alan Morton as well. Edenshaw begs with Alan to reconsider his decision, but the professor simply boasts of his new world before smacking the old man down. Alan then turns to the gate and recites an incantation, opening it before walking inside. Carnby tries to stop him, but is pulled through the gate himself in the process. Outside the gate, Edenshaw begs Aline to get the 7th statue back from Alan. Meanwhile, Carnby dreams of Hecatoncheires, the chief god of light, speaking to him, telling Edward that he is his chosen warrior. Edward awakens and calls Aline, and the pair agree to try to find Alan. Edward comes across Alan and gives chase, and Aline follows closely behind. The pair soon corner Alan and hold him at gunpoint, but they're soon interrupted by a surprisingly mutated Obed Morton, twisted by the experiments his twin brother had conducted on him. Obed then grabs his brother before jumping off a nearby cliff into an underground abyss. The pair split up again, and Aline retrieves the 7th statue dropped by Alan. Each of them then get a call from an unexpected party. Bureau 713's Frederick Johnson. Johnson reveals to Edward that he believes it was Lamb who killed Edward's friend Charles Fisk once the departed had learned too much about the Mortons and Shadow Island. He then calls Aline, admitting that he had lied about Obed being her father to get her to the island on Lamb's command. Frederick reveals that he was actually a government plant tasked with infiltrating Lamb's organization, but during the mission, his cover was blown. So he then promises to help them escape. As the pair attempt to make their way to the pedestal to place the statues, they get another call from Johnson with harrowing news. Lamb has gotten the translations from the tablet and will be able to open the gate, or any of two others that he's also found across the world. As Aline continues on, she's stopped by the mutated Obed, and what's left of him begs her to put him out of his misery, while the darkness taking over him taunts her instead. Edward, likewise, is attacked by a now mutated Alan. When Edward defeats Alan in battle, the spirit of a Native American awakens within him and stabs Alan Morton, finally killing him. Aline and Edward then meet at the pedestal and place their respective statues in their slots. The earth begins to rumble around them and they rush out to escape the island. They see Edenshaw on their way, who elects to stay behind. Johnson's helicopter then arrives to pick them up, and after Edward and Aline enter, the woman slaps the government agent for his deceptions. As the helicopter flies off, the sun rises, and the power of light sweeps the darkness of Shadow Island, and all of the horrid experiments conducted there are wiped off the face of the earth. The island's disappearance is then covered up by Christopher Lamb as a shifting of plate tectonics. This ominous scene is the last event in this Alone in the Dark continuity, leaving us with one more reboot timeline that will begin proper with 2024's Alone in the Dark. To get us ready for another new nightmare, a prologue to this new installment was released last year, giving us a peek into the new universe. To get us completely ready, let's go over Grace in the Dark. This story takes us to the year 1930 at the Derceto Manor Psychiatric Hospital in Louisiana. There, we find an 11-year-old girl named Grace Saunders making a papier-mâché mask using the pages of a manuscript called Alone in the Dark by Cassandra Beauregard, which is curiously about Jeremy Hartwood hanging himself in the attic of the Derceto. Grace hears a commotion in another room and goes to investigate. There, she finds a fellow patient and painter who happens to be named Jeremy Hartwood. Jeremy rants that he needs to tell somebody what's going on, while asking Grace if she's, quote, one of them. A confused Grace nonetheless agrees to help Jeremy mail a letter he's written to his niece, Emily Hartwood. Grace turns to fill out the envelope, but when she turns back, Jeremy has mysteriously vanished into thin air. Grace decides to take the letter downstairs to the clerk's office so it can be posted. As she moves through the manor, however, things begin to shift around her. The mansion suddenly turns into a monster-infested swampland, with Grace forced to avoid them to reach the clerk's office. When she gets there, she finds that the clerk, Mr. Waits, is nowhere to be found. She climbs into the office herself and puts the letter with the outbound mail. But as she turns to leave, she is ambushed by a massive creature before the lights cut out and we're left staring only into darkness. Sometime later, a car pulls up to Derceto Manor, and its occupants, Emily Hartwood and private investigator Edward Carnby, exit. As she gets out of the car, Emily notes that she had dreamed her uncle hanged himself in the attic the night before. Carnby and Hartwood then enter to search for Jeremy, while both of them sense that something is wrong with the manor. This brings us to the beginning of a brand new Alone in the Dark horror adventure, where we'll get to see Emily Hartwood and Edward Carnby investigate Derceto Manor for the first time in over 30 years. Hey everybody, if you enjoyed this journey into darkness, don't forget to follow me on social media to see what I'm working on with the links in the description. Special shout out to my amazing Patreon supporters and channel members on screen who give me the motivation to keep playing all of these games and making all of these videos. Remember, I'm only one person doing all of this, so if you'd like to help support, please consider on either platform, or just leave a like and a subscribe. Also, as always, leave a comment with what you'd like to see me cover next. For the rest of this year, I'm going to be focusing on covering some of the most suggested franchises, so feel free to leave a comment with your suggestions. Your input could also directly influence my next project. Alright guys, thanks, and I'll see you next time.